Hello, hello, hello. And man, this was a journey. I am so glad to be able to have a Talk Tuesday again. This was rough. This really was pretty rough, with health issues and internet issues and just without like relentlessly every week delaying this topic again and again, but we are here now, right? And it is finally time to talk about game design. Let me put on some music. For the background. All right. So, as is customary for Talk Tuesday, I will wait a little bit. There has been a delay because my internet decided to die again today. Thankfully, not very long. So I'm here now, yay! And hopefully able to do this for the whole session. But yeah, as is customary, gonna wait a little bit for people to come in, just like with a normal class, I guess. Oh, hello, Nala Akaba. Welcome to the stream. Nice to have you here. Yeah, and welcome to Talk Tuesday, where this week we're going to talk a bit about game design. And just waiting right now a little bit to allow some people to come in, or to see that the stream is online, just so that they don't miss the first couple minutes or so. But how was your day? How are you? I've been through a minor shock of finding my internet unresponsive, but hopefully everything will work now. You're well? That's good to hear. That is always a good thing. And being well. Hopefully. Nah, it's all good. My internet tends to do that sometimes, and Talk Tuesday has been delayed for 2 or 3 weeks because of various issues. But that's okay. I'm here now. We're here now. We can hopefully do this. So, to anyone wondering, Talk Tuesday, this is not a class. I am not a teacher in a seminar or in a lecture telling you about whatever topic happens to be on this week. This is more like a discussion. If you know something about the topic, feel free to chip in. If you have questions or comments or specific things that interest you, go ahead and ask. Right? So this is very freeform, which is why I labeled it Talk Tuesday and not, I don't know, like Seminar Saturday or whatever. Because this is not supposed to be a class. This is supposed to be more of an open discussion, right? And hopefully you'll learn a thing or two. That would be amazing. And maybe I will learn a thing or two, right? So that's what we're all here for. I just noticed that my tablet, for some reason, is stretched across both screens. I do not want that, so let me... That changed since the last time I did that. Mapping. There we go. Screen area, only this monitor. All right. Yes, awesome. Right, so game design. That is not a good pen. This is a better pen. There we go. Game design. A topic that comes up maybe again and again now and again in discussions about gaming in general, right? Whether you like to play certain games or are following discussions on certain games. And every now and then the design aspect of the game will come in. And what is game design, right? It's a relatively nebulous thing that many people aspire to do, which is amazing. But not a lot of people really have delved into it, I think, or know how to look at game design. So this is about all types of different games, right? When talking about game design, it is not useful, at least for the beginning, to learn the fundamentals. It is not useful to just focus on one specific thing, like video games. It is instead much more helpful to look at all sorts of different things. So things like board games. Let me actually make this a little bit smaller. There we go. Card games, even things like party games, right? Charades or Pictionary, for instance, right? Or, right, of course, video games are part of that as well, but even things like sports, which at the end of the day are also games with specific rules, with ways to determine who wins, who loses, right? So even looking at things like sports can help with grasping certain fundamentals of game design and looking at how to think about game design and how to or to find various ideas, right, on mechanics, on how to handle difficult cases, on what works, what doesn't work, etc., etc., right? All sorts of different types of games. So it is not enough if you say, I want to become a game designer. That's amazing. But then if you say, well, I want to program video games, I want to make a platformer, right, or a Metroidvania, or whatever. Yes, it helps to look at platformers and Metroidvanias that already exist. But to understand the fundamentals of game design, it also helps to look at all sorts of other games. And maybe looking at other games gives you a new insight into trying something new, into trying something different, right? And applying something from, I don't know, a sport or a party game or a card game or whatever, and implementing that and making your game, possibly better, right? So that's what I mean when I first talk about game design, right? So the fundamentals are looking at all the games, and then design. Design, when I'm talking about design right now, in the industry, you do split between design and development. Design in the industry, right? You have design, which is the initial concepts. Oops, I cannot write concepts. And And the prototype, for instance, comes out of design. And then you get development, which, as the name implies, is iterating and improving. Right? So you take a design and you develop it into a finished product. Often the same people do both, but in bigger industries, you have separate teams of people. Even in tabletop, right? Publishers usually have the professional developers or development teams that take a certain design made by a game designer, an author, and develop it further to test it, to get out all the kinks, to make sure the mechanics work well together, make sure that the game actually achieves what it wants to achieve, right? So in the industry, you split between those two. In the context of this series, it's not that helpful to distinguish between them. Mainly because as a game developer, you also need to know about design principles. You need to know about game mechanics. You need to know about play and fun. Right? You need to know about all of these things in order to successfully develop a game into something truly playable and fun for the target audience. I see that my internet is breaking off every now and then. If the stream is indeed dying, please let me know. It's fine? Okay, that's good to hear. I'm just seeing my connection dip into the red every now and then. But yeah, I'm really hoping that my internet remains stable. Right, so the specific skill sets of these two lines are slightly different, but the fundamentals are the same, right? You need to know about all of these things that I just listed. So you need to know about design fundamentals. Design fundamentals. You need to know about mechanics. Right, you need to know about fun and the target audience and so on, right? To be able to actually make something playable. So that's what I am talking about when I say game design, right? All sorts of games, and it always helps to look at all sorts of games. And design meaning partially like knowing about these things, right? Fundamentals, mechanics, fun, etc. And then applying that to crafting a game. So it's the synthesis of these two sets here. And hold on. Right, so here's the first tip for game designing, which you will hear again and again if you talk to people who do game design, or if you watch videos about game design, or read guides, etc. It's play all the games. Right? Now, of course, I know we're all people with busy lives, and some games might not be available, or some games might not be accessible for all sorts of reasons. That's fine. There are many other ways to get to know a game, right? You can watch playthroughs, or watch plays, not playthroughs, plays of the game. You can read about the game, right? You can discuss these games with others. You can, I don't know, read rule books or manuals and so on to get an idea of how the game might play. Of course, playing the game is always the best option if you have that, but there are ways around it, and the reason for that is to see what makes the games work, right? So what makes the game work? And where did my pen go? Here. And also, why is this game, or why do people think this game is fun? This game is fun. My pen is being kind of jerky. Or a slightly different phrasing that kind of tries to go for a different thing. Why do people play this game? Which is not quite the same thing, right? And looking at both angles of this question can also help. So why do people play this game? And this goes really into the design part of it. Does this game fulfill its design goals? And really, this last question is the one that is at the beginning of a design process, right? The other questions are also important, but what exactly are these questions asking about, right? Let me pick a good color for this. So this is asking about fun, which is a very nebulous concept, but it can help to think about it. And there has been some amount of work written about what fun is, what play is, and how that functions in terms of games, right? This here is looking at the specific mechanics or rules of the game. So the building blocks, right? The individual pieces, mechanical pieces in the game, and how they mesh together, how they function, and so on. But this one, this final question, is actually about design, right? So this final question is looking at what did this game try to achieve, and did the design of the game manage to achieve this? And you can apply this thinking to everything, right? Design is a really broad thing. You can design all sorts of things. You can design furniture. You can design cars. You can design, I don't know, kitchen appliances, right? You can design a program, right, that is not necessarily a game, or you can design a web browser. You can design an interface. All of this is design, and you start out with certain design goals, things that you want this product to achieve, and then you try to achieve those goals, or have the product achieve those goals by putting it together in a very specific way. So if you're designing, say, a chair, you would want this chair to be sturdy. You would want people to be able to sit on it, right? And probably you want it to be comfortable in some way, right? So those are very basic design goals. Sometimes you can also say, all right, I want it to look a certain way, right? I don't know, a certain art style. Yeah, in lieu of a better word, right? A certain art style and such. I want it to look like this. And those are goals. And then you design this chair and try to achieve these goals. You can say, well, if I make this chair out of straw, it's not going to be sturdy. So I can already disregard that, right? I need to use a sturdy material. I need to make sure that the shape of the chair means that it doesn't fall apart when someone sits on it. It can't have weird angles or sharp corners in it because then it won't be comfortable, etc. Right? So it seems very banal when talking about something like a chair, but this is the very basic design process. Right? So the very basics of the design process are really just let me write this down here. Design process is, let me write it like this. Make design goals. And then second, use available tools. And I'm using the word tools very broadly here for now. I'll get to that in a bit. To achieve goals. That's it. Right. And with tools, I mean things that whatever the product you're working on is made of. So in terms of a game, that could be the mechanics, right, and the rules and assets, right, art assets, game pieces, etc. For a chair, it's probably going to be materials, right, different types of materials. So that's what I mean when I say tools. So this is the basic design process. And all the magic happens in this second step, really, right? But it is also very, very important to have the first step. And a lot of designs that I see don't really have the first step. Or they kinda sorta have like half-baked ideas of what you might want to do, but they're not formulated. So maybe an example is helpful. So a lot of my design experience comes from tabletop games, especially role-playing games, like tabletop role-playing games. And what you see a lot is people trying to design a role-playing game because is a specific game that they played, they didn't quite like it, and so they're trying to make an improved version. That happens a lot. It's called Heartbreaker design, right? Where you take a game where you like quite a bit, or it's the only game you've ever played, right? The only role-playing game you've ever played, so you don't know anything else. But you take that and then you try to fix it by designing your own game. But a lot of times people don't really know what they want out of the game. They just know, I don't want original game. But they don't know what they want in the new game. And that's a lack of design goals. That's unclear design goals, right? A lot of people will say, oh, I want a rules light, low crunch, fast-paced game that is like D&D, and they just toss all of these words around without really knowing what they mean, without ever having defined them. And then they just give you a whole like mishmash of mechanics, like ripped from all over the place, and say, this is my game now. And I mean, sure, if they enjoy playing it, okay. But it really shows that they didn't make any design goals. And if you don't have design goals, you don't know if your design is moving in the right direction. Right? I'm not gonna say complete because, right? Is a design ever complete? Right? The whole strive for perfection thing. But at the very least, having design goals makes sure that you can check that your design is moving in the right direction. Right? So if you want to include something, you can say, well, does this support what I want to achieve with this game? And if it does, okay, put it in, try it out. If it doesn't, you can say, maybe not the best fit. Right, so these are the two basic steps of the design process. Then we get to the tools. Let me pick a different color. Tools, in this case, are the mechanics mainly. Right? Games run on mechanics that are meshed together, given to players, and then the players use the mechanics of this game to play it. That's basically what it is, right? In a very simplistic view. And somewhere in here, right, it might not be your design goal, and that's important to see. It might not be your design goal, but somewhere in here is fun. Right? You want people to achieve some form of fun, usually, when you're designing a game, right? You could design a game for all sorts of reasons. But usually you're designing a game because you want people to have fun, right? And then we're back to those three questions that we had before. Right here. What makes this game work? Right? How does it use the tools? Why do people think it's fun, or why do they play this game, right? How does this game deal with fun? And then, does this game fulfill its design goals? Which is the first point here, right? The goals. So, here we have these three aspects. Again, let me just write that down to have it complete, right? Or mark it, right? Design goals. So here we have these three aspects once again. So the fundamentals of game design are really basic, if you think about it, right? There's not much to it. You try to envision what kind of a game you want. Why do you think people might play it? And then how do you make this game work? That's essentially it. And of course, after that, it gets complex. The world is your oyster. You can use whatever there is to make your game and try to make it the best you can. All right. Let's see. Let's see if I can find this. Mda, yes, there we go. So, now, when talking about fun, right? What makes a game fun? Fun is a very nebulous thing, as I've said, and a lot of discussion on what makes a game good or bad, which are the wrong terms to use, really, but a lot of discussion on various games are really just people looking for different types of fun. There are a lot of different ways to have fun, and people want different things out of a game when they play it. Right? And it is these differences in taste that lead to a lot of discussion on why game A is better than game B or what have you, right? So it does help to actually look at the concept of fun. Now, the concept of fun and of play, there is quite a bit written about it in psychology. And it is interesting to delve into, but probably too much, right? If we're just talking about some fundamentals of game design. Instead, it's much more useful to think in a couple of categories. So there is this framework, and this is one of the very few pieces of truly academic work done on game design. There's not a lot, sadly, but this is one of them, and it deals with the Mda framework. There is a Wikipedia article on it. There is it's a relatively short paper. It's like 5 or 6 pages, right? And it's for free as a PDF. And the Mda framework, Mda, by the way, stands for mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. All right, that's the Mda framework. So this framework essentially says that a game is made out of individual mechanics. The way these mechanics interact and the way the players use these mechanics leads to certain dynamics emerging out of the gameplay. And these dynamics then lead to a certain experience, right? That is hopefully fun for the player playing the game, right? So mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics. Aesthetics is just a word for fun, right? It's chosen as that word because it is more broad. And if you see the categories that were made for different types of aesthetics, you can see that fun doesn't quite cover it as well. So these authors identified 8 types of aesthetics. There are very likely more, but these 8 already cover quite a bit. I'm just going to not jot them down really quickly. Again, this article, there is a Wikipedia article on this, right? Just Mda Framework. So they have sensation, right? The player wants to experience something through their senses, right? Nice visuals or nice audio and such. Game as fantasy or game as make-believe, right? People want to escape into an imaginary world. Narrative, game as story or game as drama, right? Players want to experience a story through the game. Challenge. The player wants to be challenged on their skill on beating the game, right? Fellowship. This one's very interesting because this one is something not a lot of people think of. Game as a vehicle to socializing, as a social activity, right? That's the most important part. The game itself is only a tool used to be together with others. Discovery. So discovering certain things in a game, right? Exploring uncharted territory. Expression, this one is also interesting. Creative gaming, right? Game as self-discovery, game as creativity. And then submission, this is a very interesting word, but game as a pastime, right? Just playing the game to shut off or to relax, right? Which is also a type of fun. I need to turn on a light real quick. Light. Okay, sorry about that. So these are the eight aesthetics that the paper identifies. There might be more, again, especially now with more and more games coming out and more different games coming out. But these 8 are already good categories to look at. So why is this useful? Why is it useful to have categories like this? Because you can use these to inform your design goals. You can say, I would like a game that is a challenge to players, right? Dark Souls, all the Souls-like games are very clearly designed with that in mind. They also have other things, right? They also have sensation and narrative and discovery in there, right? There is a strange world to explore. The world looks really good, especially Elden Ring, right? A lot of people have said, wow, Elden Ring looks amazing. You just walk through the world and just stop and look at it and such. But the focal point really is the challenge, right? The hard boss fights. And that informs the design decisions of the game, right? That informs, all right, when we design the mechanics of this game and the systems of this game, we want challenging, tough combat for the player to be at the forefront, right? A lot of old platformer games were also built with this in mind, because back then really challenge was one of the only things that you could do with old video games. I'm talking like Famicom, NES era, like Super Mario. Well, not Super Mario's already next one, but like Mario Brothers and such. There's not a lot of narrative in there. There's not necessarily a lot of like sensation or discovery or expression in there, and not really like much else, but it is mainly challenge. So how do you design for that given the tools you have, right? There might be some games that are something completely different. Breath of the Wild, for instance. Breath of the Wild is very big in discovery. That's right. That's the big thing it was marketed as. Right, a huge world, an open world that you can just go out and explore for dozens and dozens of hours. So yes, discovery is definitely on the forefront of the design goal for Breath of the Wild. Something like Minecraft would be expression, right? Minecraft is deliberately made so that the player has a lot of different options of crafting their own things, right? And some of the stuff you see that people have made with Minecraft, like entire cities or and so on, that's definitely expression. And it's interesting to see when updates, for instance, come out, right? Because a lot of the updates in Minecraft are not so much expression. The updates in Minecraft, if you've been keeping up with them, right? They had the Caves and Cliffs update relatively recently, where they added completely new cave systems and how they were calculated and some back-end math and like world generation things. And the updates they make cater toward discovery, right? Which is an interesting thing, and a lot of people were very happy with those. So that actually says, okay, Minecraft is a game for a lot of self-expression, but people also like the discovery aspect of it. And so you have both of these things making it fun, and the interchange and interplay of all of this is probably, and the intuitive simplicity is probably what makes the game so successful, right? So that's how to use these to inform your design goals. And you can possibly look at bad examples. I don't have any off the top of my head right now. But a game that is, well, many horror games do this, sadly, where the goal of the game, of course, if you have a horror game, is to scare the player or to build a creepy atmosphere and to actually emotionally impact the player, to terrify them, because, you know, fear in a safe environment can be a lot of fun. That's why people go on roller coasters, right? It is fear and excitement, but it is in a safe environment, and that allows you to experience these emotions. Same with horror games, right? If something happens to you in game, it's only in the game. You, the player, are fine. And that's the same idea, right? But a lot of horror games, what they do, and I've seen this in several, is they try to make the game difficult, and they do so by doing things like adding in an example. There's this horror game called White Day. It's a Korean horror game where you play a student, a high school student, I think, who goes into the school at night and finds out that it's haunted and has to deal with the ghosts and such, right? And it is a good horror game in that aspect, that you have to explore this creepy, completely empty school, that there are some ghosts that are really malevolent and some ghosts that you need to help, and you also have to find your girlfriend who's trapped in there somewhere, etc. Right? So it's, that part is well done. It has a very creepy atmosphere. But there's one aspect, I don't know why they put it in, right? To make the game, I don't know, scary or challenging, is there is a janitor running around. And if the janitor spots you, he starts chasing after you, and if he catches up to you, he beats you to death. And then you have to restart from a save point. And that in itself could be good in a horror game if it happens every now and then, right? Saying, oh, you're never safe. There's even this crazy janitor. And, well, it's like a spike in excitement, which is great for attention curves, right? Which is what you want. But what instead happens is that the janitor just walks around the school, and you run into him at the most inopportune times. And because it's a school with really long hallways, there are not a lot of places to hide from him. So you hide somewhere, and then you have to wait 2 minutes for the janitor to move away, and then you come out, and then just then the AI tells him to turn around, he shines his flashlight on you, and then you have to chase again. So at some point, that starts becoming annoying rather than terrifying. And that is misusing the tools you have because you don't understand what the tools actually do when players play the game. And I'm not the only one to say this. Like, I watched people play this on stream, and everyone, all the people in chat and the streamer themselves even said, like, when the janitor popped up yet again, is like, I mean, he was good-humored about it, right? But you could tell that it was becoming frustrating and annoying rather than fun, because the game completely misaimed what it's trying to do with the mechanics it inserted. Right? So that is one example of not understanding what design goal you're actually going for, and then misusing the mechanics. And that's actually the step that comes after, right? So mechanics lead to dynamics, and the whole janitor becoming annoying thing is a dynamic, right? The mechanics of the game are there is a janitor who chases you. You have to avoid the janitor. The janitor has a certain view range and a flashlight. There are dark corners and lockers, etc., where you can hide, and so on. Those are the individual mechanics. But the way they were implemented creates the dynamic of the janitor just randomly pops up, chases you all over the place, and you spend so much time just running away from him that you don't get to solve all of the ghost puzzles that are the actual focus of the game. Right? So that's the emergent gameplay that comes out of it. So that was a negative example, right? And these dynamics then lead to the aesthetic of this game is annoying, or rather, this game is not a horror game with trying to exorcise ghosts or solve their puzzles or whatever. It's about a challenge, right? It suddenly becomes a completely different game. It's no longer about the narrative, it's no longer about the sensation, it's about the challenge. And that is made by the dynamics, right? So you may have a certain goal in mind, but if you misimplement the tools into your game, the result can be a completely different gameplay experience. To sum that up. Right. And of course, as a side note to this, some players might create their own fun out of a game, such as speedrunning, right? Speedrunning is a completely different take on how to play games. And it is fun to a huge number of people. It was not, like, most games were not designed to be speedrun, but still people take these games and say, well, I'm going to change what the game is about. I'm going to make this a challenge. I'm going to see if I can play this game as quickly as possible, and that's how I get my fun out of it, right? And there are many bad games, like really horrible games, just badly programmed, very glitchy or buggy, or bad controls, or just in general not good games that are still being enjoyed by speedrunners because they derive a whole different kind of fun by changing the entire frame of reference around how they enjoy this game. So that is also a thing that happens, like even in classical, I say classic, in classic games, right? Chess, take chess. Chess can be a game of very intense strategizing and reading your opponent, or you can play speed chess, which is a different experience, right? And then there are other things that, like chess boxing, which is something completely different as well, right? But even for games like that, right, you have different things. Poker as well, right? Poker, another classic. You can have really high stakes poker where people play for tens of thousands of dollars, or you can just have your friends over at a birthday party or so and say, you know what, let's just play some poker. You know, we're all suitably buzzed and poker is simple. Let's just have some good fun. And no one wins or loses any real money. It's just to play something together, right? It's the exact same game. And you have completely different ways to enjoy this game, right? To say nothing of other variants, strip poker, for instance, which is like a completely different focus again. Poker is no longer the point of that game. But you can see there are a lot of different ways to enjoy games. So that is something to keep in mind. That is not something you can control, but that is something to keep in mind. Speaking of what you can control, that's the other big point of the Mda framework, right? On the one side, you have the designer. On the other side, you have the player. As a player, you tend to look at games from this direction. You're looking at what kind of an experience does this game give me? Is it a game that challenges me? Is it a game I can play with friends? Is it a game where I can explore in a fantastic world? Right? Is it a game where I can express myself? Is it a game that has a cool story? And so on. That's what you're looking at when you first look at a game. You don't really look at a game and say, I want to play this game because it has really good jump mechanics and physics in it. People don't usually pick games for those kind of reasons, right? They pick games because, oh, I really enjoy shooters. I want to challenge myself with that. I want to click on heads, or I really want to experience deep stories, or all that sort of thing, right? But as a designer, you can only design games. Oops, that was a horrible line. You can only design games in this direction. The only thing you have direct control over is the mechanics. You have kinda sorta loose control over the dynamics of the game, but you basically have no more control over the eventual aesthetics. At the end experience that comes out of your game, you cannot directly control that. You can only tweak the dials all the way in the beginning with the mechanics. Right? So that is another thing to look at, or to keep in mind, right? A player judges what games they want to play depending on what kind of an experience it will give them, whether it will be fun for them. A designer can only craft a specific combination of mechanics and hope that the emerging gameplay provides the type of fun that the player wants. Right? And this is also the thing to keep in mind when playing games with game design in mind. Right? To be aware of the distinctions between these levels, saying, oh yeah, I like this game because, I don't know, I like worker placement games as a board game example, right? Or I like deck building games, right? And so I want to play that, right? And I like the fun it gives me, the type of fun. And then as a designer, you look at, okay, but how is this implemented? What is making this game fun? How do the mechanics support this type of fun? Right? That's what you typically need to look at. And this leads back to these questions, right? What makes the game work? What are the mechanics of a game? When playing a game with a design point of view, you look at the actual mechanics. You look at, okay, why was this included? Why is this rule in here? Why not this, right? What is the point of that? And a funny thing you can often find is patch rules that were put in during game development. Very specific rules in games that are there to prevent or enable, usually prevent, a specific edge case that would break the game apart or make it no longer fun. That was caught during development at some point, but then said, if we want to get rid of this, we would have to change so much, so we're just putting in this patch rule, right? So I can't think of any examples right now, but you sometimes see that in tabletop games. And it's very interesting to hunt for rules like that to see, okay, the mechanics are this, and they produce these kind of dynamics, and then people caught this dynamic that they did not want and implemented a rule to cut it out, or not as often saw, oh, this thing is missing, let's put in a rule to put that in. Actually, I can think of an example. Puerto Rico, I think. The board game Puerto Rico is a game where every turn, I think it's every turn, a ship of colonists arrives, or workers arrives. And this ship is communal, so you have this on the board, and you put a number of tokens in there representing these people, depending on player number, etc. And you're supposed to refill this at the end of the turn, and then sometime in the next turn, this thing becomes relevant. And there is a specific rule, I'm not sure if I'm remembering it correctly, but somewhere along those lines. The specifics are not important. And then somewhere in the rules, it also says, if the players have forgotten to refill the ship at the end of the turn, just use this number instead. Because how many workers you put into the ship depends on the state of the game at that point in time. And then once you move past that, the state changes. It's very difficult to reconstruct who did what and what it was and how many workers need to go in there. So the game developers caught on that people tended to forget to do this all the time. Right? This final step of filling up the ship with workers. And then just say, you know what? Instead of just having people roll back the game and calculate everything back, and let's just say, just use this number instead. You know, we know people are going to forget it, and let's have this rule in here because we want the game to keep moving, and it's good enough, right? So that's an example of a patch rule, where playtesting has caught that players, being humans, tend to forget this one action, right? Refilling the ship, and then are no longer able to do so once the game has moved on, once the game state has changed. And that's like, things like that are very interesting to find, right? So you look at what makes the game work, and then you look at, why is this game fun, or why do people play it, right? And this goes into, like, there are a lot of questions on certain games. Why are certain games so popular, even though a lot of people say they're not actually that fun? I'm going to name a game, and a lot of you are going to know this game, and are going to say, this game might not be that fun. But a lot of people play it anyway, and it is one of the most printed, probably the most printed, hugest game in the world. Monopoly. Monopoly is infamous for being not all that fun, right? It's infamous for dragging on. It's infamous for, like, you know who's going to win like an hour or two before the game ends. It's infamous for its randomness, deciding who wins or loses, right? So there are a lot of things that make Monopoly not fun. By the way, that was never the point of the game. The point of the game was to show capitalism, essentially, right? It was as an illustration of inequality in capitalism. So in that, it manages the design goals perfectly, right? But a lot of people still play the game, even though the game is not all that fun. So why do people still play it, right? And instead of saying, well, these people are wrong, right? They don't know what a good game is or so. Well, no, they're clearly having enough fun to be willing to sit down, get this game out, set it up, and then play it for an hour or 2 or 4 or whatever, right? So why? What drives them to do that? What in the game makes this work? And there are many different answers, and it depends a lot on the game group and on the people themselves. A couple of possible answers are things like the opening of Monopoly is pretty fun, right? The first hour or so is not bad when everyone still has a level playing field and you just roll dice and just like buy these ridiculous streets and such and be like, oh, I have 2 train stations, and you can, you know, you can joke around with this. You can have fun. It's a game that is most everyone knows how to play, and if not, it is extremely simple to explain, to teach, right? So the buy-in is very, very low. It's practically non-existent. So that leads people to pick this game as opposed to many other games. And the game is often secondary to just hanging out. Again, that's the fellowship aesthetic, right? The game is only a vehicle for people to come together, have some fun, hang out, chit-chat, etc., right? And then as the game drags on and becomes no longer fun, people tend to forget the game and just hang out, right? That also tends to happen. So those are a couple of possible answers as to why people still play Monopoly, even though it is notoriously not fun, right? And if you look at those kind of things and search for these kind of things for games, especially for games that you personally don't enjoy, but a lot of other people do, right? Then you can say, all right, why? Why do these people like the game? What is it that makes this game fun for these people? And how do the mechanics drive this type of fun? Right? And when you then design your own game, or when you then look at the game and say, all right, what was this game setting out to do? And is this achieved? Are people playing the game because of this? Right? People are definitely not playing Monopoly because of its original design intent. Like, people don't know the original design intent mostly. But you can then move on to think, all right, is this game well designed? Is this game elegant? Elegant is a shaky word to use, but I want to say it's elegant when the design actually fulfills the design goals in a way that is not convoluted, right? So that is playing games with a designer's point of view in mind. I need to take a drink. I've been talking for an hour. But yeah, if there are any questions or comments or so, feel free to just type them in chat and discuss. This is an open table. Right. All right. All right, so oops, that's not what I wanted to scroll. So in summary, when looking at game design. Oh, hold on, the name is a bit small. I need to connect to my, who just followed? Phi.x? Is that correct? Phi.x? Thank you for the follow. Yeah. Oh, welcome to the guild. Hope you'll join us for many adventures. Oh, and Nala Kava, I just saw that you followed me several hours ago. Sorry, my activity feed was down. Yeah, thanks for the follow as well. And yeah, hi, Phi.x. How are you doing? Hope you're having a good day. I just spent a long time talking about my experiences in game design. And, well, not my specific experiences, but like how to think in game design. And, hold on, my music is ended. There. Yeah, so we went through quite a bit. As a quick recap, game design, when thinking about game design, it helps to look at all sorts of games, right? Board games, card games, party games, video games, even sports. You can learn quite a bit from various sports, in fact. And design is knowing design fundamentals, knowing how mechanics work, what mechanics are available in your particular genre, I want to say, medium that you're designing in, what constitutes fun, and what audience you're targeting, right? So play games, play lots of games, and when you're playing games, don't just play them, but actively think about them, analyze them, right? What makes the game work? How does it tick, right? Why do people think this game is fun? Why do you think this game is fun, right, when you're playing a game? Or why do you think this game is not fun, right? Evaluate your experiences as a player while playing the game. It is valid, right? When you're playing a game, think about, why do I want to play this again? Or why do I never want to touch it again? Or why is it, it's okay, but could use an improvement here or there, right? What makes you think that? What makes you feel that in the game? And then design goals of a game, right? What did this game set out to achieve? Does that work? This last point, you see a lot, to give another example, you see a lot in board game adaptations of popular video games. Where the design goal was very likely to craft the same experience, the same basic experience that you get from playing the video game, but as a board game. And a lot of times these board games go horrendously wrong because they don't understand, either because they don't understand what people find fun in the original video game, or they don't understand the mechanics that they included, or both. There are a number of examples of board games based off popular video games that are either just bad games, or that are a completely different experience than the video game they're based off. The Fallout board game, Fallout 3, I think, Fallout 3 board game, the Shovel Knight. Is it Shovel? Yeah, Shovel Knight board game. The Horizon Zero Dawn board game, Stardew Valley board game. All of these board games, some of them are actually bad, right? Like the Fallout board game is really bad. But others simply provide a completely different experience. Like the Stardew Valley board game, for instance. Stardew Valley is a very chill game, right? Where you just sit there and, yeah, sure, you're taking care of a farm. And yeah, you're participating in village events and competitions and such, and there is a mine with slimes and enemies, but overall it's a very chill game. You just sit there, you just while away a couple hours, and you're just doing very repetitive zen actions, right? Just petting your animals, planting and watering your plants, etc., right? The Stardew Valley board game is a race against time with RNG, which is a completely different experience, right? You have a limited number of turns to finish a certain number of randomly chosen missions, and you have randomly chosen, like, generated items and such to try and complete those missions. And it's very time pressure, deadline focused, like mission based, which is a completely different experience. Not saying that that is not necessarily fun, but is that Stardew Valley? Right? So that's where you can see that the possible design goal of make a board game that plays or that gives the same experience as the video game just went completely sideways. So this is what to look out for, right, when playing games as a designer. Then we talked about there, the design process. The design process is just 2 simple steps. Make a design goal, and then use the tools you have to achieve those goals. Right? In theory, it's very, very easy. The hard part is the practice, right? And game design is a skill you can learn and improve. And just playing games with a new view, a new perspective, also helps improve your design, right? And then finally, we talked about the Mda framework, which is a good theoretical framework to keep in mind when designing games, right? There's different types of fun, different types of aesthetics. Players tend to pick games based on their aesthetics, but designers can only directly control mechanics, which then lead to certain emergent dynamics. And these emergent dynamics provide a certain aesthetic to the player, but you have no direct control over that. Right? So knowing what mechanics to put into your game and what these mechanics and the interplay between these mechanics, that's also very important. What they do is like leads to completely different games, really, right? And completely different gameplay experiences. It's a simple, very simple things sometimes, right? Like a game where you control, I don't know, where there's some degree of platforming involved and such, is like, do you have fall damage in that game? Do you put that in there? The answer is not always yes, right? A lot of old platformers didn't have fall damage. Mario, Mega Man, etc. They don't have fall damage because that would have made a completely different game, right? The whole point, especially of Mega Man, for instance, is to try platforming sections, potentially fail, fall down to the start of the section, and then try again with your new knowledge. If you had fall damage in that game, that would make for a very different experience. Instead of people just attempting things and trying them over and over and becoming better at the game, they would be extremely careful and time every jump very carefully. And be absolutely sure that they're not going to fall. And it's going to make for a very different gameplay experience if something like Mega Man had fall damage. Right? But that's such a minor little thing, if you think about it, in the grand scheme of things. That's such a minor thing to include or not to include, but it will completely change the end experience for the player. And it's questions like that you want to really analyze. Do I put this into my game or not? Right? What does this specific mechanic do for my game? What kind of an experience does it provide if I have this in there? Like, and there's all sorts of mechanics like that where different games have chosen different or made different decisions on it simply based on what is necessary and what isn't, right? Things like a game like Diablo has very limited inventory space because that reinforces the whole you have to it's a bit like loot gacha, right? You have to get lucky drops and then you have to make decisions on what loot drops to keep, because you cannot carry everything unless you spend hours and hours, right, just running back and forth. Whereas other games don't have any inventory management at all. They have inventory, but they don't have inventory management, right? Because that doesn't reinforce anything in the game. It's an interesting point. Yeah, I'm glad I was able to provide that, because that's like small things that you really need to look at as a designer. And you can look at games that already exist and see, like you can look at successful series like Mega Man, right? Mega Man is a hugely successful series, and say, all right, what exactly do they do? How is it going correctly? And then you can look at failed games, right? Failed games usually don't spawn series, but you can look at failed games or games that don't do well and see if any design decisions led to that. Speaking of Mega Man, there was one fan-made entry, Mighty Number 7. Not sure if you've heard of that one, but Mighty Number 7 was essentially a kickstarted fan-made homage to Mega Man, because there had been no new Mega Man game in a long time, and people really wanted something. And then I think they even got one of the original designers to be on the team and such. So people were really hyped about this game, saying like, yeah, finally, it's not a Mega Man game, but it's the same deal, right? It's the same kind of experience, and yeah, people were hungry for more Mega Man, and then Mighty Number 7 completely bombed. It's a bad game. It's a really bad game. And there is a very good video series. I think it's now one long video on YouTube. It's like an hour long. Looking at various design decisions that the makers of Mighty Number 7 did, which made the game so bad, right? I'm not gonna go through it here because you can watch the video yourself. Just Mighty Number 7, what went wrong, or something like that. If you search for that, it's like an hour long video essay on the flaws of Mighty Number 7, and specifically comparing it to Mega Man, because looking at how Mega Man did things right and how Mighty Number 7 got it wrong, and you can learn a lot about how mechanics that might seem innocuous, when you put them into a game like that, suddenly makes the game just bad, really. And it's a lot of small things. It's a lot of small decisions here and there. Like, do I have fall damage? Do I have inventory management? Do I have, I don't know, a hunger system? Do I have a day-night cycle in certain games, right? Whatever genre of game. Do I have RNG in there, right? Even something as fundamental as that. If I put it in there, what's that going to change? If I don't, what is it not? Like, there are a lot of RNG, like roguelite, etc. games that rely heavily on RNG, but that give you a certain degree of control. For instance, Slay the Spire, right? Slay the Spire is very heavily RNG, but you can see the complete path from the beginning all the way to the end, and you can see what types of rooms you're going to encounter if you follow certain paths, so you can plan accordingly. It's not full information, it's partial information, but it's enough for you to not be completely lost. Whereas there's another game, I forgot the name, but it came out like a couple months ago, where you play where you manage the monsters in a dungeon. So basically, you're the mega boss in a dungeon, and you place your minions into certain rooms, and then adventurers come and try to beat you, and you have to stop them. Basically, that's the idea. And that game also has RNG in it, but no way for you to compensate or control. Right, essentially, between every adventure run, you get time to manage your minions and manage your dungeon, and a couple of actions, but you do not see what the next actions are. So one action might be, do I heal this minion, or do I don't know, send it out to earn some gold? And then you have to make a choice then and there, and then you get to see the next possibility. And that means everything is that much more random, that much less under your control, and makes the game that much less fun compared to a game like Slay the Spire. So again, that's a lot of small decisions that you put into the game that can completely change how the game plays, right? And that's not even going into technical thing. Did I say is it Mighty Number 9? Maybe it's Mighty Number 9. Mighty Number 9 then. Mighty Number 9, what happened? Something like... What happened with Mighty Number 9? What went wrong? Yeah, what the hell went wrong with Mighty Number 9? A comprehensive game design analysis. Yeah, 54 minutes. I will link that in the chat.
Discuss this game's version of the...
I will link this in the chat, actually. Sorry, yes, Mighty Number 9. Got the name wrong. Yes, so that's an hour-long video essay, essentially, on various design decisions in Mighty Number 9 that don't make sense or make it a worse game than it could have been, right? Especially since Mega Man doesn't have these problems, and they could have just looked at what does Mega Man do, because Mega Man is highly successful, right? People still play it to this day. So yeah, that's one thing, one example. So yeah, what to take away from this? Design in its essence is relatively simple, right? You need a clear goal. What do you want your game to achieve? Nice. Definitely worth it. So yeah, design goals. What do you want your game to achieve? What do you want players to experience while playing your game? And there are a lot of different things that players can and want to experience, right? Some players just want a mechanical challenge. They want to test their skill and their reactions. Some people just want to enjoy games with others. Some people want to get lost in a world. Some people want to experience heavy-hitting stories, right? There's a reason games like Detroit Become Human and Fahrenheit and all of those, right? There's a reason those Heavy Rain, that's the word I was thinking of. There's a reason these games are relatively popular, right? Are they fun? Not from a mechanical point of view, right? The mechanics are, you just click on things essentially. But they give you a very deep, involved story. So some players want that, right? Some people just want to click on candies until they all disappear just to pass the time while sitting on a bus. That's also fine, right? all sorts of different types of fun that players want to have. And then you pick your mechanics in accordance with what you hope the experience will turn out to be. That's basically it. So what are some things to look out for? Well, first, play games. Duh. Play games, look at analyses of games, watch games being played, and so on. All sorts of games, right? Look at sports, look at video games, at party games, board games. Think about, why do people play them, or why do people enjoy them, right? Why do so many people in the world, why is the biggest sport in the world soccer? Why? Right? What makes people celebrate and live and breathe this game? What is it? Right? And that's something to think about, right? What is it about the game? Is it the mechanics? Probably not, right? It must be something else, right? So this is like a good exercise to really think about such games, as there are millions and millions and millions of people who think this is fun. Why? Right? Even if you personally disagree, it still helps to look at these things. And yeah, so that's the basics of this session. And really what's to look at is mechanics. That's the further thing, right? What kinds of mechanics could exist? What do they do? How do they function, right? And this is going to be, I will not be able to cover everything, and this is also going to be an open dialogue, essentially. Like, anyone can chip in and say, oh, I know this game where you do this thing, because there are so many mechanics. And this is mechanics, interestingly, is where the art portion of game design comes in. Design is both science and art. And mechanics is a lot of art, because a lot of creative new things can come out, right? Sometimes games become a big hit because they innovate on a mechanical side. They introduce something completely new, and suddenly everyone's like, oh my goodness, why haven't we thought of doing this before? Right? And that's where the art and creative part of it comes in. So what mechanics are there? And of course, examples and case studies, right? Looking at games that work, games that don't work, why they work or why they don't work, and so on. And then, so those are the bigger portions of what to talk about next in follow-up sessions. So yeah, top as games simple mechanics. Do you think sometimes better mechanics could get in the way of anything else that's making these games enjoyable? That's, do you have games with simple mechanics? What exactly do you mean with better? Like replacing a simple mechanic with a more complex one, but that could elevate the game? Is that what you're talking about? Maybe an example. So I mean, it... Alright, let me try and think. It's soccer or narrative games, yes. Possibly, yes. Because, again, it depends on why people enjoy these games. If people enjoy a narrative game for the story, then mechanics, the mechanics don't matter as much. necessarily. Sometimes the mechanics do underscore something. Let me think of an example. Like, I'm thinking of the various Dark Picture anthologies. Right, the Dark Picture anthologies, Man of Medan. I think it started with Until Dawn. That's like the prequel-ish thing, and then you have Man of Medan, House of Ashes, Little Hope. I think like those the horror narrative games. Those have quick time events where you can turn off the timer, right? It is possible for people who purely want the story to turn off the timer and just go through it at their own pace. But there are quick time events in that game where if you fail the event, the story essentially goes to a worse, or takes a step toward the worst conclusion, right? Because, I don't know, someone gets injured and then that injury is going to limit what they can do in a later scene, etc. But those mechanics underscore what the game is, like the type of story the game is trying to tell. The game is trying to tell a tense horror story where the characters' lives are on the line and they could die, right? And very often they do when you play through and don't really know what's happening. So those quick time events add moments of spiked tension and yeah, up the general tension, right? So those kind of mechanics work in the favor of such a narrative. Whereas Heavy Rain, for instance, Heavy Rain for some reason has very convoluted mechanics. You have like very precise pointer movements or game controller joystick movements to do things like get a book out of a shelf, right? You need to like move your joystick up and then have a circle to the left downwards or something. It's really odd. And it's like, why did you put those mechanics in there? What purpose do those mechanics serve? And the answer is none, right? You don't need complex joystick movements or mouse pointer movements to grab a book off a shelf. It's just there to have something mechanically. So I hope that kind of answers the question. Like, simple mechanics are good for when they need to take a backseat, but sometimes you can actually use mechanics to elevate what you're trying to do. And you can see that with soccer as well. Like, there have been rules changes in soccer to make the game different, like the golden goal rule. The golden goal was, if the game went into overtime after the 90 minutes, you would play 2 more sets of 15 minutes each, I think. And the old rule for the golden goal was the first team. So essentially, at that point, you go into overtime because the teams are tied, right? And the golden goal rule was the first team to score a goal in this extended time immediately wins. And that was changed to if they look at the 15-minute segment, right? If either team is ahead in goals after the first 15 minutes, they win. But if the other team then manages to tie them back up again, you play the second 15 minutes. And if it's still tied, then you go into penalty shots. So the reason they changed that was because it put too much pressure and too much randomness into the game, right? Like, you could score a goal, like, you don't score a goal just purely based on luck, but luck and small mistakes had too much of an impact for a match that's already been going on for 1.5 hours, right? And it makes for a very unsatisfying ending and does not value team effort and team skill as much as the current golden goal rules. So you definitely see changes like that happening to shift the game into something that more people would find enjoyable. So, and ideally, the mechanics of a game should always support what the game is trying to achieve. Mechanics are never just there. They can be simple, sure, but they're never just there in a vacuum. They are a fixed part of the game, and in the best case, they support the game and support whatever experience you want to deliver. It's rarely you don't see a lot of good examples, but you do see bad examples. For instance, where the game is trying to craft a certain experience, but then you interact with the mechanics and suddenly the mechanics completely tear you out of the experience because they're just so jarring and so not fitting to what the game is trying to do or what the game is trying to tell. So in my opinion, there's always room for improvement, or you should always look at, do my mechanics help with the game experience I want to deliver? Rather than just saying, oh, this is good enough, or they're not in the way, right? Okay, that's serviceable, but it's possible to go better, is my opinion on that. But yeah, that's also something to look out for, right? Like if you see certain games that have specific mechanics and you say, oh, this mechanic really fits this game, or wait, this mechanic makes no sense, I'm now completely torn out because I need to think differently to interact with it, and then shift my mindset again to interact with the rest of the game, right? This does happen, and it's something to look out for when playing games. And yeah, there's a lot to be learned with bad games, right? What not to do, basically. It's a bit sad, but it's true, right? Look at successful games, but also look at bad games and look at the design decisions made in them, right? So look at design decisions, because sometimes you just look at a game and say, why did they put that in there? Why is the game designed like this? I do not understand. It's to the detriment of the game. And right? And then see how the parts might not fit together. You don't necessarily have to fix everything. It's a good thought exercise trying to fix certain things, but it's not necessary. You know, it's just as valuable to see what should I avoid. Okay. So yeah, I think that's quite enough for today from my side. Anything from chat, from you guys? Questions, comments, etc. Anything else you're interested about? Like, I am going to have more sessions on game design. I'm going to talk about what constitutes mechanics, look at a couple of examples and case studies. We've looked at a couple today, right? Whenever that comes up, but it's always good to like commit yourself to looking at them. And a lot of these you can find online as well, right? There are a lot of videos and such talking about game design, and many of these videos that talk about game design go into specific examples, right? They look at a specific game, or they look at a specific example, mechanic, or they look at a specific genre or something, and then say, what does this game do right, or where did this thing go wrong, right? And it's just case studies. So those are valuable to look at. So what I'm trying to do here is also to look at a bigger holistic picture of design as a whole and how to understand all of these case studies, right, that you can find online on YouTube, etc. Right, let me save this real quick. All right. Yeah, if there are no other questions or so for now, I think this is a good point to, end the stream, end this session of Talk Tuesday. I am so glad that my internet did not die, and I'm so glad that I can restart this series and finally talk about some game design. All right. Yeah, I will continue this next Tuesday if my internet doesn't die again, which it strangely does very often. But yeah, my plan is definitely to continue this next Tuesday. I will, however, look for someone to raid. So let's see who's on. However, look for someone to raid. Wait, what's going on? So let's see who's on. Okay. My Twitch. Yeah, thank you for coming here. Let me see. Is this? Oh. Let me see who's on. My Twitch is being a little bit slow. Who is on? Let's see. Okay, I know someone to raid. We are going to raid Lumen, who is playing the Stanley Parable, which is amazing because the Stanley Parable is a game that does things completely differently, right? So the Stanley Parable is actually a good game to look at when thinking about game design, right? It is pretty popular, but it does things so completely differently than many games before that. I mean, now there are games that try and copy Stanley Parable, but you know, back when it started, that was pretty new. So we are going to raid. Is this? Yes, correctly spelled. So we're going to raid Lumen. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming by. This was a lot of fun. I hope you learned a thing or two. And I'm going to stream more on Thursday and Saturday, and I will be continuing this series on game design next Tuesday, same time. So yeah, thank you all for coming by. Take care and bye-bye.